Welcome to the Human Resources for Small Business podcast, presented by Xenium HR. I'm your host, Brandon Laws. Whether you're an HR professional or a small business leader, each episode of this podcast is designed to bring you the latest in technical HR and leadership at your convenience. More content is available on our website at www.xeniumhr.com. Let's dive into today's topic. Okay, I'm so excited to have you back. We got Lacey, Partipilo.
Yep, back.
Missed you.
Yeah,
it's
just a few months.
It feels like a long time. I mean, you've been back for a while, but we haven't been able to get you on a podcast. So
right.
We're back. I pitched an article idea to you that we're going to talk about today. This one's from the SHRM magazine. Edition was in spring 2019, so it's fresh. This question that's posed, and I think that this is a series where they do a point and counterpoint. Mm-hmm. So one person's for this question and one person's against it. Should HR professionals be required to work in the office full time? And I wanted to talk about this because obviously we are in the HR industry. We're consultants and we have a lot to say about whether or not HR should be there. But I think philosophically, I think a lot of employers are just asking this question in general about a lot of their employees. So I think we can kind of frame it up in two ways. One being, should HR people be allowed to be or do they need to be in the office or not? Mm-hmm. And then maybe we could talk about some of the other employees and talk about some things remote there. Work. Right. So let me first outline some of the ideas from this article. Mm-hmm. And then I'll have you jump in and I want to hear what you think. How about I'll start with the point of yes, HR needs to be in the office, and I want to hear your response. Okay. So this person, David Epstein, basically says, yes, HR needs to be in the office full time, and the reason why is because they need to be breaking down silos and communicating across all the teams. So they need to be there to do that. They need to work with key executives on a regular basis for strategy. And they need to be present for that. They can't do it remotely. Right. They need to support employees on a regular basis, probably employee relations, maybe paperwork, whatever you HR people do. And then supporting managers and preparing them. He made the point of preparing for the next generation of workers. Mm-hmm. I thought that was a decent point. So those points alone, are those good enough reasons to be in the office 100% of the time?
I don't think so. I can think of a counter to each of those. I think the workplace has changed. So when you say in the office, it doesn't have to be physical anymore. Our offices, we have employees that work remote. We have companies. I have a ton of clients that have multiple locations. Yeah. So are they going to put an HR person at every single location? Not necessarily.
That's a good point, because this would almost assume it's just a one location business, maybe small organization.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I think just the definition of workplace now has changed, and employee expectations have changed in terms of how they want to be communicated to. And so for those reasons, and probably a lot more that we can talk about, I just don't think that it has to be a sort of butts in the seats kind of job now. Yeah.
Okay, let's go with the counterpoint now, and then we'll jump back to both and we'll talk about what we think. So the counterpoint's by Jennifer Payne, and I want to preface this by saying I thought her angle was a little interesting because it was the selfish needs of the person versus the business. So yeah. I don't know if I love the way it was framed up, but I think the points are decent enough. So the case for HR telecommuting, essentially, no stress for the person for commuting. Mm-hmm. Okay, better work-life balance. I can say no to that. Reduce financial burden. So that was the one that I actually thought was an employer-focused one. Actually, her point's no, it's saving money on gas for commuting and other things.
There could be an employer benefit, right? Totally. No office space.
I know, I'm giving her a hard time here. Greater productivity. I
think it depends on the person there, because I've had employees where I've said, you can work from home. And they've said,
Yeah.
I actually can't get anything done because all I'm thinking about is
The
laundry and
dishes.
yeah. So
Totally. So let's see. The last point was, nowadays you can be accessible through so many different channels. So like David on the point side, he had talked about like, oh, you need to be present to talk with executives and employees. And her counterpoint, which is probably the best argument in all of this, is that no, the tools available, you can do it face to face with a video chat. There's Slack and Microsoft Teams and all these other tools to do instant messaging and whatnot. So you could do your job essentially remote. Okay, so those are the points and counterpoints. Where do you stand on all this?
I mean, I think Xenium has proven over and over again, and our clients I know would say this, that you don't have to be physically there to be able to make an impact.
Yeah, to be effective.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think there are a handful of tasks that we would tell a company that we work with that have to be done, physically in person. So things like really sensitive employee relations issues where, paying attention to body language is important. But I think on the other side of that, you could say, well, couldn't you use video for that? Things like separations. I've done those over Skype because an employee works remotely in another state. It's awkward. It's really awkward.
Over
Yeah,
video?
for me, for the manager, for the employee. But when there isn't another way around it, it's better than over the phone.
Forgive me if I've made this analogy before or made a comparison of it, like with the Up in the Air movie with George Clooney and Anna Kendrick.
Flying in
they're flying in to do it, but like then they started trying to make it efficient, and then they started doing the video stuff, and
it's awful.
Oh, it's awful.
It's
it's awful. They're on
people
the other side
often
of the screen.
compare us to. I feel like they think we're like that. Just
we don't go in and just fire people all the time.
No.
That's very rare occasions, but
Right.
of course. That's part of the people processes when we have to do that.
But we can be, I think you can be strategic even remotely. I think there's just so much value in sitting shoulder to shoulder with somebody when it's a really tough situation, or when you're brainstorming and trying to come up with new ideas and new ways to do things. But I just see so much value in the benefits that she talks about in the article. And it's true. It's for the person. I can't really think of a business reason to say our HR person is going to be remote. The value in outsourcing, so you've got depth of resources and you have a team, is different to me than having an one person HR department working from home. Yeah. So I think maybe my mindset is coming from, of course it works. We do it all the time.
Yeah. I what I love about these point and counterpoint arguments is that it's a polarized argument, but the answer always lies somewhere in the middle.
That's how HR is. It's always in the middle, and it always depends.
It always depends. I think that our model, like to your point, is a good one because like even if you need ongoing like daily interactions with people, or there's lots of paperwork, or you need to hire and fire or be there all the time, that's where we've actually come to the solution of like having where we augment, right? There's somebody there in the workplace, whether it's their employee or we hire and we wrap around our own person that's doing administrative HR. And then we're augmenting, having a strategy person like you, an HR business partner who has a direct line to the CEO or the president or whoever you're reporting to. And then you're also working with that person. They report to you, the administrative HR person. So you get the best of both worlds, I think, when you have the daily stuff that you need to handle, but then you have strategy when you need it, right? And I think when you consider like, okay, if it's just all in-house HR, again, I think the answer is it's somewhere in the middle, because you don't need to be there 100% of the time, because inevitably you're still working on projects, you're still doing things that with your head down. And I think I go back to a book I read years ago, and I interviewed the author on the podcast, The Results-Oriented Workplace. And they talked about how, if you have an appointment with somebody, that's one thing. Like if you need to be there in person, okay, schedule it, right? So scheduling time at home, working at home on your projects and whatever you're doing, same thing. And then schedule time in the office with the executives or the people. Like I would treat it the same way. So I don't think it could be 100% remote. That's just my personal opinion.
I don't either. I think there's some things that really should be handled in person. But
Yep.
but then I think about exceptions to that, because I have a client that has employees all over the globe. So they have a global workforce, and their HR person is in one country and employees are everywhere else, and they make it work and it's functional, and they take advantage of technology, and they're really careful with their time. And I mean, you can imagine people are saying it's challenging when everybody's in the same city but working remote. Think about different time zones. And so, but they've managed to do it. And there's, I think there are strategies so that you could still be effective.
You're talking about Annika, right? Yeah. So I got to have her on the podcast. I think that would be a fun topic to just talk about a distributed workforce and talk about how they do it.
And there are challenges
shout out
to
you,
it.
Annika. I know you're probably listening at some point, but that I don't have firsthand experience in that. You've obviously worked with them and their organization, but I know a lot of organizations are doing it. I've never seen it firsthand how it could work. So part of me believes, it could work. And we know it can, but how do you do it? I think it's the how that I think a lot of people struggle with, and that's why there's this point and counterpoint argument.
Yeah. I think it's, you know what it comes down to, at least for me, what I see them doing and other companies doing is you have to take more time and you have to be really thoughtful. Yeah. So it can't be the quick gonna stop in your office. It might mean scheduling meetings instead of sort of doing the ad hoc drop-ins. And I think when you're communicating big company decisions or changes, the change management part of that process is just super critical when people are not in the same room and you're able to kind of get the vibe from them. Yeah. Yeah.
I wonder what tools would be the best to use in a if everybody's distributed, you know, especially for the HR person, because they seemingly would have a lot of personal interactions. So is it all instant messaging? Is it email?
I think it's a combo of all of that. I think there's project management tools that need to be used when you're in a workforce where there's a lot of collaboration and people are working together. The instant messaging is something that I've seen. Having video available for folks is important. And also making time to get together. So one of the things that Annika's team does is these retreats. I'm not sure if that's the word that they use, but where they all go to the same city. And it probably is different, you know, depending on where they decide they want to go. But they get together, I think it's a few times a year, so that there is FaceTime, so that they can collaborate. And it's obviously a huge investment from the company to do that, because you're flying people around and putting them up in hotels. But the value that you get out of that. But again, you're being really thoughtful about how are we going to use that time, because there's a lot of money sitting in that room.
100%. In fact, we have a podcast coming out soon. I don't know if this one's going to publish before the other one or vice versa, but Meeting Sucks is the book that I had interviewed the author, Cameron Harold, on it. And he talks about that. He basically does an analysis. It's like, okay, if everybody makes like 70 grand and you're in there for 1 to 2 hours, like how much money you have basically if you run a really crappy meeting, how much money's wasted right there.
Right.
So I think being remote would force you to be more thoughtful about how you're using your time. And I think that's why I really like it.
Me too.
Is you don't waste time at the water cooler. As much as we need that culture stuff, I do think you'd be missing that piece. But
I think people can use chat to do that. We're seeing some of that here.
Where we were sending gifts to each other the other day on Microsoft Teams. So
there's a way
to do it and still have fun or whatever. And you could text each other, whatever it may be, to still keep the culture intact. Yeah. But I think it's a good thing. But of course, the answer is always, it depends, right? Because I think it depends on the organization. Like if everybody in the organization, they're on the manufacturing floor, is it fair that the HR person gets to work remote 100% of the time?
Yeah, probably not. And in that kind of environment, it would probably be ineffective because those employees do not have access to email. They don't have access to technology for communication. And so their means of communicating with their go-to person for employee relations issues, questions around policies, just a soundboard needs to be present. So that's why I said it depends on the population of employees. It depends on your industry, what would be acceptable in tech. Probably it's going to be a lot more feasible. Also, I think about like the growth cycle of an organization and where you are in that. So if you're growing and hiring a lot of people, having people physically together, if you've got an actual workplace, how important that is, right? Sure. For culture, for team building. And the HR person is typically responsible for leading a lot of that along with the leadership team.
Just speaking like in general terms about just this remote workforce thing, it's interesting because I was building a report, the What People Want from Work survey that we do every single year, which we'll have the 2019 version releasing in like the summertime. But I was going through all of the feedback that people, like we have an open ended comment section at the very end that was talking about like, okay, what's one thing your employer can do to make a difference in your happiness? And time again, it was flexibility and remote work at least one day a week, or like compressed schedules. And it's like, we're talking about HR people here, but this applies to everybody. I think as an employer, if you're listening to this discussion and you're thinking, oh my gosh, my employees are already starting to ask me about this. And this is why. It's like the tools are available. People don't want to waste their time driving into work. They don't want to waste time at the water cooler. They want to be productive and they want to contribute. And I think the best thing that you can do is have a conversation with them, set boundaries, set results. It's at the end of the day, it's what are you contributing and what kind of results you're getting? Because if they're not getting results, then obviously you could pull them back into the workforce.
Absolutely.
And say you have to be physically here. But I think
you could test it, do a trial, right? And with how connected people are, I mean, there's lots of research out there about nowadays people aren't stopping their workday at 5:00, right? We take it home, we're on our email, so the boundaries and what we're giving to our employer is much greater than, I would say 20 years ago.
Yep.
So because of that, how can we give back to employees to allow some breathing room? And I think that's why people want it, because they do feel so connected that physically being in the office just sort of adds to that feeling of, being attached to the work, and that flexibility is important.
Well, case in point, so we talked about like the model that we present at Xenium, where we wrap around people, or we are the HR department and we're remote. We're not like on site unless we have a Xenium on site there. But this goes to show like, okay, you could still be productive and not be there, because there's been time and time again where, and this is, I'm not trying to put you out here, but 10 p.m., 11 p.m. rolls around and you're doing, I know you're like buried on client work and you're doing client work and you're not physically at their office. You're at home on your couch or wherever you're doing work and you're still getting stuff done.
Yeah.
And that's behind the scenes. Nobody sees that. So I think you got to give this remote stuff a try, because people are always connected. And so I think physically demanding people be there is just, it's an old school model. Granted, there are industries where it's hard to do that, but I think giving people some freedom and flexibility is a good idea.
I do too.
What do you think? Yeah, you think so?
Agreed.
Okay. All right. I'm just not speaking from, my rear end and just like spitting some weird opinions.
I think there's in the article, I think there's points to both sides of it.
Good. So. Well, this has been fun. I'm glad you came back for a podcast. We're gonna have lots of Lacey coming out at some point soon if I can get you between all your client work. Where can people reach you?
I'm on LinkedIn.
Do you check your LinkedIn?
I do.
Okay, good.
Do.
So reach out to Lacey, let her know how you like the podcast, and if she's right or wrong about this whole remote stuff, or you could reach out to me too. Yeah, call us both out. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram, all those places. So feel free to reach out to me too. And thanks for listening today. Thanks for listening to the Human Resources for Small Business podcast. Subscribe to this podcast and leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, be sure to check out our blog at www.xeniumhr.com/blog and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn to hear about the latest in HR and leadership. The information on today's episode is for educational purposes only and should not be taken as legal or customized advice for you or your organization. This podcast is hosted and fully produced by Brandon Laws, that's me, and created and owned by Xenium Resources, Inc. For more information or to contact us, visit www.xeniumhr.com.